Hi everybody, welcome to Haiku Talk. I'm your host, Ben Ga, your friendly neighborhood haiku poet. Today we're going to look at a Senryu from Lori Becherer. This Senryu comes to us from the latest issue of Failed Haiku. And normally when I title my episodes, I like to use the first line of the poem. But in this instance, I'm going to use the second line. And that second line is his Army Memoir. Okay. So, grab a beverage, sit back, and let's get ready to Senryu. Okay, welcome back. Let's dig into this wonderful poem. Now, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment, and I mean, that can be said probably at any moment in time, but in this in particular moment with the atrocities and the war going on in the Ukraine, it might be why this poem is very resonant for me. But here is Lori's poem. Reading his Army Memoir. What isn't said. Reading his Army Memoir. What isn't said. It's a really, really nice Senryu. And before we break it down, I just want to say a little bit about it. One of the things that's nice about haiku and Senryu is that they do invite you, the reader, into the moment to fill in the empty spaces in that moment with all of your own life experience. And what's interesting about this one is that the I of the poem is actually reading a war memoir and is trying to fill in the empty spaces left by that writer of the memoir. You know, trying to read between the lines, see what's present in the text that's not actually in the text. So it's kind of a very kind of meta kind of haiku or Senryu, where it's a moment within a moment, and the I of the poem is, the reader is doing the work, the same type of work as what's happening in the moment that's being captured here. And I just find that really, really fascinating and really engaging. I also am just really struck by the news these days, and seeing a land war happen on the continent of Europe, and thinking about the last time a large land war was waged. And I'm sure this is where this is where I go into the poem, thinking of a war memoir or an army memoir, and thinking about both my grandfathers who fought in World War II, doing different things, and in how they didn't really talk much about the war. Not that either of them were on the front lines. They both had support roles. One grandfather was an engineer, so he was behind the front lines, kind of fixing radios and doing repairs. And another grandpa, he could type, so he had more of a administrative task, working with a air glider unit, where he would, they'd send the gliders over, and most of the time those gliders wouldn't come back. And watching these things happen right now on live TV or live streaming, we're seeing people say goodbye to their loved ones, and people doing whatever they can to fight. And you've got to think that there's memoirs, there are things that are being written right now that somebody in the future is going to be reading, memoirs. So even though this poem is looking at something that happened in the past, because of what's happening today in our the present world, there's another layer that gets added onto this poem for me. So it's very, very layered. There's a lot happening. And so let's go ahead and break it down like we normally do. We'll first start with how the poem is organized. We talk a lot about the fragment and the phrase. And in this case, we have the fragment and the phrase again. The fragment comes at the end, and the phrase comes at the top. The phrase in this case is reading his Army Memoir. lines 1 and 2. And the fragment is what isn't said. And having that sit at the bottom of the phrase allows you to enter into context or enter into a moment, and then that last line gives it the context of what it is that is the focal point of the moment that's being captured. Well, let's break this down line by line. Line 1 is the simple one-word line of reading. You know, by now I do love one-word lines in these poems. And this one, being a writer, the word reading just, speaks to me. It speaks to the heart. And again, it's another one of those multi-level things. Like, you read the line reading, and you're reading the word reading. So there's this, I like the interplay of everything that's happening here. And we don't really know what we're reading or why we're reading or where we're reading. We just know that we're reading. And just seeing that word, for me, puts me in a happy place, because I do like to read. And I do like to read haiku and senryu, and I'm reading this, so I'm wanting to continue forward. So line 1, reading. And line 2 gives us a little bit more context about what it is we're reading. It is his Army Memoir. His Army Memoir. And so that tells us a lot. It's 3 words, but it tells us a lot, because we're reading an account, an army soldier's account of something. The implication here is that it's a memoir of the time, maybe an overall, you could say an overall time spent in the army, but most likely it's a memoir of the times in rough times of war, times of conflict. And that's where this poem starts to trickle into your own life narrative. And like I said, it brought me to both my grandpas and the experiences that they had in the war, and that I don't know a lot about that because it wasn't talked about too much. And I know that's true of a lot of World War II vets. They didn't talk a lot about the war. It seems to be, maybe it's the case for most vets. And my dad, during the Vietnam era, my dad was in the reserves, and he didn't actually go over and see conflict, so I didn't have that question for him or any of his friends, direct close group of friends, didn't see conflict either. So I grew up with the only direct contact to war was through my grandfathers and their experiences going overseas. And and neither of them left a memoir. But that's where my mind goes into this moment. It goes into reading what they would have written down, and what an interesting account that might have been, And so I linger on this line a little bit before I go to line 3, because already I'm just hooked, and it takes me to someplace very specific, very introspective, and then again connecting it not only to my own life and my own family in the past, because both of them are deceased now, but also then tying it to what's going on in the world. And then eventually I do move on to that third line, which is a really great one. And that third line is, what isn't said. What a line. Reading the memoir, but trying to piece out what's absent, fill in the spaces, fill in the gaps. Think about the things that he didn't write about, that he didn't put down. And again, I have to pause for my own personal, my own life, because I keep a journal. I've kept a journal since 1993. I have on my 27th volume of it. And I know myself as somebody that journals, there are things that I write down and things that I don't. And so those records, even though they're very personal, and in your mind's mind, you'd think that they're going to be good insights into somebody's soul, somebody's person. But you're not necessarily, if you go into reading the text expecting to read all of the details about somebody's life and who they are and what their insights are, you're not going to get that whole picture directly from what's in the text. There are going to be things that are left out for whatever reason. And thinking about somebody looking at their somebody else's war memoir, or war diary, war journal, what did they put down there and what didn't they put down? Who didn't they write about? What things were they not allowed to write about, perhaps? I don't know. It just makes me think and really, really sit a long time with this poem. And hopefully by encountering it here as well, you'll sit with it a bit too. And that's another thing about Senryu, is that a lot of times they are fun poems because they deal with human nature. And I think we've had examples in this before. I mean, they don't always necessarily deal with the light side of human nature. They also deal with the dark side. And this one deals with kind of that mysterious side of who we know as people and how well we think we know them and how well you kind of really get to know anyone, even yourself. That whole line of what isn't said. Man, just think about that in your own life. What don't you say to people? What don't you want to say to yourself? And one day when we're gone and people are looking back at the things that we've left behind, what things did we explicitly say and what things didn't we say? And especially that empty space around the things we didn't say, how telling is that? How revealing is that? So this one is an excellent poem, very topical, very complicated for just 7 words. 7 words. I mean, it's amazing. That's all I'm really going to say about this piece. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully, maybe it'll sit with you like it has me. And if you're not familiar with Failed Haiku, this is the first time I featured the journal on the channel. It is a monthly journal that comes out every month, and it's what I would call kind of a big tent journal. They don't have a restriction of how many poems make the cut. Now, I do know they not everything gets in. You don't just submit everything. You can submit to them, and everything you get in gets sent. I mean, there is an editorial process there, but I find there's a broad spectrum of voices in the journal, and the title of it, Failed Haiku, comes from the founder Mike Relling's little joke that he has about where his Senryu come from, is that he used to say that he was trying to write the haiku that don't work and that fail in his mind end up being reworked as Senryu. And so that's where the humorous title for the journal comes from. But check it out. It's they have a lot of different guest editors and fun special issues and so on, and it's available for free online right up there. And that's it. Hope everybody is safe. Hopefully everybody is, doing what they can in these times that we're living in. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell on the main page so that you get notified if you want for when new episodes turn about. And until next time, peace out.